Sometimes a guitar isn't just an instrument. It's a bridge between broken hearts, a voice for the voiceless, and a miracle waiting to unfold in the most unexpected hands. This is the story of a shy boy who became the target of cruel laughter when bullies dared him to play at the school talent show, never knowing that a single father in the audience held the missing piece of his shattered world. What happened on that gymnasium stage would silence an entire auditorium, heal wounds that had festered for years, and prove that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the deepest pain. The boy's trembling fingers would strum not just guitar strings, but heartstrings that connected two souls across a decade of separation and loss. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn rain drummed steadily against the windows of Lincoln Elementary's main office, creating a rhythmic backdrop to what should have been another ordinary Tuesday afternoon. But for Edward Fisher, nothing about this day felt ordinary. He sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair outside Principal Morgan's office, his work boots still muddy from the construction site, his flannel shirt damp from the sprint through the parking lot when he'd gotten the call. "Mr. Fisher, we need you to come in immediately. There's been an incident with Leo." Those words had hit him like a sledgehammer to the chest. In the 3 years since he'd been raising Leo alone, since Sarah's accident had turned their world upside down, Edward had dreaded calls like this. Not because Leo was a troublemaker, quite the opposite. His 11-year-old son was so quiet, so withdrawn, that Edward sometimes worried he was disappearing entirely into himself. Leo had always been different. Even before the accident, he'd been the kind of kid who preferred books to playgrounds, who would rather sit alone drawing in his notebook than join the chaos of recess. But after losing his mother, that gentle introversion had hardened into something more concerning, a shell so thick that even Edward struggled to reach through it sometimes. The office door opened, and Mrs. Patterson, the school counselor, emerged with the expression that immediately put Edward on edge. Behind her came Leo, his dark hair falling across his face like a curtain, his shoulders hunched forward in that familiar defensive posture. But it was the guitar case in his small hands that made Edward's breath catch. Edward hadn't seen that guitar case in 3 years. It had been Sarah's, gathering dust in their bedroom closet since the day she died. How had Leo even gotten it? When had he taken it from the house? "Mr. Fisher," Mrs. Patterson said gently, "thank you for coming so quickly. Leo isn't in trouble exactly, but we wanted to discuss what happened in music class today." Edward knelt down to Leo's eye level, searching his son's face for clues. The boy's cheeks were flushed red, whether from embarrassment or tears, Edward couldn't tell. "Hey buddy, you okay?" Leo nodded slightly but didn't lift his eyes. His grip on the guitar case tightened. Mrs. Patterson gestured toward the chairs. "Please, let's sit down. Leo, do you want to tell your dad what happened, or would you like me to?" Leo's voice came out as barely a whisper. "I can tell him." Edward waited, his heart aching at how small his son looked in that moment. Leo had always been slight for his age, but right now he seemed to be trying to fold in on himself completely. The music teacher, Mr. Hayes, was talking about the Winter Talent Show, Leo began, his words coming slowly. He asked if anyone played instruments at home. Some kids raised their hands, and then Leo's voice faltered. "Then what, son?" Dylan Martinez started laughing. He said I probably couldn't even hold a guitar right, let alone play one. He dared me to bring one to school and prove I wasn't just a weird, quiet kid who didn't know anything about music. Edward felt a familiar surge of protective anger. Dylan Martinez had been a thorn in Leo's side since kindergarten, one of those kids who seemed to have a radar for finding other children's soft spots and pressing on them relentlessly. "So you brought Mom's guitar," Edward said softly. Leo finally looked up, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I know I wasn't supposed to go in your room. I know you keep the door closed for a reason. But I wanted to show them I wasn't stupid. I wanted to prove I could do something." Mrs. Patterson leaned forward. "Leo played beautifully, Mr. Fisher. That's actually why we called you. What started as a challenging situation turned into something quite remarkable." Edward blinked, confused. "I don't understand. Your son has a gift," she continued. When he started playing, the entire classroom went silent. Even Dylan stopped his teasing. Leo played a song that I've never heard before, something gentle and melancholy that had half the class in tears by the end. Edward stared at his son in amazement. "Leo, I had no idea you knew how to play." Leo's cheeks reddened again. "Mum taught me. Before the accident. We used to practice together when you were at work. She said music was like a secret, language that could say things regular words couldn't." The mention of Sarah hit Edward like a physical blow. She had always been the musical one in their family. Guitar, piano, voice. She could do it all. She'd tried to teach Edward over the years, but his thick construction worker's fingers had never been delicate enough for the frets. He'd loved listening to her play, though, especially in the evenings when she thought he was asleep. She'd sit by Leo's crib and play soft lullabies that seemed to make the whole house feel peaceful. "The song he played," Mrs. Patterson continued, "Mr. Hayes thinks it might have been an original composition. Leo said his mother helped him write it before she passed away." Edward's throat tightened. Sarah had been working on a song in those final weeks before the accident. He'd hear her humming it while she did dishes or folded laundry, see her scribbling lyrics on scraps of paper that she'd stuff into her pockets. He'd assumed it was lost forever, just another piece of her that had vanished with the crash. "I finished it," Leo said quietly. "After she died, I kept working on it. I remembered the melody, and I wrote down the words I thought she would have wanted. I play it sometimes when I miss her too much." Edward had to look away for a moment to compose himself. How had he missed this? How had his son been carrying this musical connection to Sarah all this time? And Edward had been completely oblivious. "To it, Mr. Fisher," Mrs. Patterson said gently. "Mr. Hayes would like to talk to you about the possibility of Leo performing in the Winter Talent Show. What happened today started as teasing, but it ended with genuine appreciation from his classmates. We think it might be good for Leo's confidence." Leo shook his head quickly. "I don't want to perform in front of everyone. Today was scary enough." Edward studied his son's face. He could see the conflict there, a desire to share his music warring with his natural shyness and fear of being judged. It was the same expression Sarah used to get when she was torn between wanting to perform and worrying she wasn't good enough. "What if we practiced together?" Edward heard himself saying. "What if I learned to play backup for you?" Both Leo and Mrs. Patterson looked at him in surprise. "Dad, you don't know how to play guitar," Leo said. Edward smiled for the first time since getting the phone call. "Then I guess you'll have to teach me, just like Mum taught you." Something shifted in Leo's expression, a tiny spark of possibility breaking through the fear. "You really want to learn?" Leo asked. Edward nodded, feeling more certain with each word. "I really want to learn, and maybe it's time I heard that song your mum was working on." Leo clutched the guitar case tighter, but this time it looked less like he was protecting himself and more like he was holding on to something precious. "Okay," he whispered. "I can teach you." As they walked out of the school together, Edward realized that this moment, this unexpected crisis that had brought them here, might actually be the beginning of something beautiful. For 3 years, he'd been trying to figure out how to connect with his son, how to fill the void that Sarah's death had left in both their lives. Maybe the answer had been sitting in their bedroom closet all along, waiting for a shy boy's courage. and a bully's dare to bring it back into the light. Edward Fisher's alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m. every weekday morning, just as it had for the past 3 years. The sound cut through the silence of their small 2-bedroom house on Oakwood Street like a rusty knife, jarring him from whatever restless sleep he'd managed to find. He rolled over in the bed that still felt too big, too empty, despite the years that had passed since Sarah's side had gone cold. The routine was always the same. Coffee first, black, strong, and bitter enough to shock his system awake. Then, a quick shower, work clothes that smelled faintly of sawdust and drywall compound, and a breakfast of whatever he could throw together while making Leo's lunch. By 6:45, he'd be quietly checking on his son, who would be curled up in his twin bed, dark hair splayed across the pillow, looking smaller and more fragile than any 11-year-old should. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Edward worked construction for Hartwell and Associates, a mid-sized company that specialized in commercial buildings throughout Cedar Falls and the surrounding counties. It was honest work, decent pay, and flexible enough that he could usually adjust his schedule when Leo needed him. But it also meant long days, aching muscles, and hands that were permanently stained with dirt and calluses. He'd been doing this dance alone for 3 years now. Single father, full-time worker, cook, cleaner, homework helper, and everything else that parenting demanded. Some days, he felt like he was barely keeping his head above water. Other days, like when Leo would surprise him with a drawing he'd made at school, or when they'd have one of their rare conversations that lasted longer than a few sentences, Edward felt like maybe he was getting the hang of it. But most days, if he was being honest, he felt like he was failing. Leo had always been a quiet kid, even when Sarah was alive. She used to joke that he'd gotten his father's thoughtful nature and her artistic soul, which made him the perfect combination of observer and dreamer. But after the accident, that natural introversion had morphed into something more concerning. Leo barely spoke unless directly asked a question. He spent most of his free time alone in his room, drawing in sketchbooks or reading library books about faraway places. He had no close friends, showed little interest in sports or typical boy activities, and seemed to move through life like he was trying not to take up too much space. Edward had tried everything he could think of. He'd signed Leo up for Little League, but the boy had spent most games sitting in the dugout, staring at the clouds. He'd enrolled him in art classes at the community center, thinking that might tap into his creative side. But Leo had quit after 2 sessions, claiming the other kids were too loud. He'd even tried family counseling for a while, but Leo had sat through most sessions in silence, answering the therapist's questions with shrugs and one-word responses. The house they lived in was modest but comfortable, a 1970s ranch-style home, with 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a small backyard that backed up to a wooded area. Sarah had fallen in love with it when they'd first looked at it 7 years ago, pregnant with Leo and full of dreams about the family they were going to build. She talked about putting in a garden, maybe adding a deck where they could sit in the evenings and watch Leo play in the yard. Most of those dreams were still just dreams. Edward had never gotten around to the deck, and the only thing growing in the backyard was weeds and the old oak tree that dropped leaves all over everything each fall. But it was home, and it was paid for, and it provided the stability that Leo needed, even if it sometimes felt more like a museum of memories than a place where new life was happening. The master bedroom had become Edward's private shrine to Sarah. He kept the door closed most of the time, not because he was trying to preserve anything, but because walking into that room still felt like stepping into a wound that hadn't quite healed. Her guitar was in the closet, along with boxes of sheet music, half-finished songs, and the small recording device she'd used to capture melodies when inspiration struck. Her clothes were still hanging in the closet, Her perfume still sat on. The dresser and her wedding ring was in a small jewelry box on the nightstand, the one thing from the accident that had come back undamaged. Edward hadn't touched any of it. He told himself it was because Leo might want these things someday, but the truth was that he didn't know how to let go. Sarah had been the music in their house, literally and figuratively. She'd been the one who sang while she cooked dinner, who played lullabies when Leo couldn't sleep, who filled the silence with melodies that made everything feel warmer and more alive. Without her, their home had become a place of quiet routines and careful politeness. Edward and Leo coexisted rather than truly lived together. They ate dinner while watching the news or doing homework. They talked about practical things, school, chores, what to have for breakfast. They were kind to each other, respectful and careful not to push too hard into the spaces where grief still lived. But there was no music, there was no laughter that lasted longer than a few seconds. There were no spontaneous moments of joy or connection that used to make their little family feel complete. Edward knew that Leo was struggling with more than just typical preteen awkwardness. The boy had inherited Sarah's sensitive nature, but without her guidance, he seemed lost in a world that felt too big and too harsh for someone with such a gentle spirit. Edward watched his son navigate the brutal social dynamics of elementary school, the teasing, the exclusion, the casual cruelty that kids could inflict on anyone who was different, and felt helpless to protect him. Dylan Martinez was just the latest in a series of kids who seemed to target Leo for reasons Edward couldn't quite understand. Maybe it was because Leo was an easy target. He never fought back, never caused drama, never drew attention to the bullying. Or maybe it was because there was something about quiet, artistic kids that threatened the more aggressive children, some instinct that made them want to test whether gentleness was actually weakness. Edward had tried talking to Leo about standing up for himself, but those conversations never went anywhere productive. Leo would nod and agree that he should be more assertive, but then nothing would change. He'd come home from school with the same defeated expression, the same slumped shoulders, the same reluctance to talk about his day. Work was Edward's escape from the worry and frustration of single parenting. On the construction site, problems had clear solutions. If a wall was crooked, you tore it down and built it straight. If a measurement was wrong, you measured again and cut a new piece. There was satisfaction in working with his hands, in seeing tangible progress at the end of each day, in being part of a team where communication was direct and relationships were straightforward. His co-workers at Hartwell and Associates had been supportive after Sarah's death, giving him the time and space he needed to figure out his new reality. Frank Kelly, the site foreman, had become something of a mentor, offering practical advice about everything from dealing with school administrators to finding reliable babysitters. Caleb Wright, one of the younger guys on the crew, often invited Edward and Leo to barbecues or baseball games, trying to draw them into a social circle that might help fill some of the emptiness. But Edward found it hard to accept help or to open up about the depth of his struggles. He'd always been self-reliant, the kind of man who solved his own problems and took care of his own family. Admitting that he was overwhelmed, that he wasn't sure he was enough for Leo, felt like admitting failure in the most fundamental way possible. So he kept pushing forward day after day, hoping that consistency and patience would eventually pay off. He told himself that Leo just needed time, that grief had its own timeline, that eventually his son would find his way back to the world of the living. But on nights like this, sitting in his truck outside the school after getting yet another phone call about his son's struggles, Edward couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Leo was getting older, more set in his patterns of isolation and withdrawal. The window for intervention, for connection, for healing seemed to be closing a little more each day. What Edward didn't know, as he sat in that uncomfortable plastic chair waiting to learn about the latest crisis, was that sometimes the thing you've been searching for has been waiting in the most unexpected place all along. Sometimes the key to healing isn't moving forward, it's going back to pick up the pieces you thought were too broken to save. The drive home from Lincoln Elementary was filled with an uncomfortable silence that stretched between Edward and Leo. Like a chasm neither knew how to cross. Leo sat in the passenger seat, the guitar case balanced carefully across his lap, his fingers tracing the worn leather handle with an almost reverent touch. Edward kept stealing glances at his son, trying to process what he'd just learned, trying to reconcile the quiet, withdrawn boy he knew with the musical prodigy that Mrs. Patterson had described. When they pulled into their driveway on Oakwood Street, neither of them moved to get out immediately. The autumn sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across their small front yard and making the windows of their house glow like amber. It was the kind of peaceful evening that Sarah used to love, the kind when she'd suggest they sit on the front porch with glasses of iced tea and watch the neighborhood come alive with kids playing and dogs barking and the gentle rhythm of suburban life. "Dad?" Leo's voice was so soft that Edward almost missed it. "Yeah, buddy. Are you mad at me for taking Mum's guitar without asking?" Edward turned off the engine and really looked at his son. Leo's dark eyes were wide with worry, his small hands still clutching the guitar case like it might disappear if he let go. In that moment, Edward saw Sarah so clearly, it took his breath away. The same expressive eyes, the same way of holding on to things that mattered, the same gentle vulnerability that made you want to protect them from every harsh thing in the world. "No, Leo, I'm not mad." Edward's voice was rougher than he intended. I'm sorry I didn't know you could play. I'm sorry I kept all of Mum's things locked away where you couldn't reach them. They sat in the truck for another moment, watching their neighbors go about their evening routines. Mrs. Chen from next door was watering her flower boxes. The Peterson kids were riding their bikes in circles around their driveway. Everything looked normal, ordinary, but Edward felt like something fundamental had shifted in the past hour. "Can I show you?" Leo asked suddenly. "The song I played today? The one Mom and I were working on?" Edward's throat tightened. He'd been avoiding Sarah's music for 3 years, unable to face the memories it would dredge up. But looking at his son's hopeful expression, he realized that his grief had been stealing more than just his own healing. It had been robbing Leo of a connection to his mother that was rightfully his. "I'd like that," Edward said. "I'd like that, very much." Inside the house, Leo disappeared into his bedroom for a few minutes while Edward stood in the living room, trying to prepare himself for whatever was about to happen. The space felt different somehow, charged with possibility in a way it hadn't for years. Their modest furniture, the brown sectional sofa that had seen better days, the coffee table covered with Leo's homework and Edward's work magazines, the bookshelf stuffed with an eclectic mix of technical manuals and fantasy novels, suddenly looked like the setting for something important rather than just a place where they existed side by side. When Leo emerged, he'd changed out of his school clothes into jeans and one of his favorite t-shirts, and he carried the guitar with more confidence than Edward had ever seen him display. He settled cross-legged on the carpet in front of the couch, cradling the instrument with a familiarity that spoke of countless hours of practice. "This is a Martin D28, Leo said, running his hand along the guitar's wooden body. "Mum always said it was her most precious possession, even more than her wedding ring, because music was what brought you two together." Edward blinked in surprise. He'd never told Leo that story, about how he'd first met Sarah at an open mic night at Murphy's Tavern downtown, how she'd been playing this exact guitar when he'd fallen in love with her voice before he'd even seen her face. How had she shared that with Leo without Edward knowing? Leo began tuning the guitar with practiced movements, his ear tilted toward the strings as he adjusted each peg with tiny, precise turns. She taught me that you have to listen really carefully, he explained. Not just to whether it sounds right, but to how it feels when you play it. She said every guitar has its own personality. As Leo's fingers found their positions on the fretboard, Edward noticed details he'd somehow missed before. His son's hands were no longer the chubby, uncoordinated hands of a little boy. They'd grown longer, more graceful, with calluses on the fingertips that spoke of serious practice. When had that happened? When had Leo transformed from a child fumbling with toys into a young person who could handle something as complex as Sarah's beloved guitar? The song is called Finding Home, Leo said softly. Mom said it was about all the different places we look for happiness, and how sometimes home isn't a place at all. It's the people who love you. The first chord rang out clear and true, and Edward's world tilted on its axis. It was Sarah's sound, that particular warmth and richness that her Martin had always produced, but filtered through Leo's smaller hands and different touch. The melody that followed was hauntingly beautiful, a series of notes that seemed to tell a story all by themselves before Leo even began to sing. When his son's voice joined the guitar, Edward had to grip the arm of the couch to steady himself. Leo's voice was still changing, sometimes cracking slightly on the higher notes, but there was something achingly pure about it. More than that, there were phrases, inflections, ways of shaping words that were unmistakably Sarah's influence. She lived on in their son's music in a way that Edward had never imagined possible. The lyrics, when they came, hit Edward like physical blows. I've been walking down these empty roads, looking for a place to call my own. Every door I try seems locked up tight, but then I hear you calling in the night. Edward realized he was crying before he felt the tears on his cheeks. This wasn't just a song. It was Sarah's voice from beyond the grave, channeled through their son's remarkable gift. It was her philosophy about love and family and belonging, preserved in melody and passed down like a precious inheritance. Home isn't in the walls around me. Home isn't in the bed I sleep. Home is in the arms that hold me. Home is in the promises we keep. As Leo sang, his confidence grew. His voice became stronger, more assured, and Edward could see the transformation happening in real time. This withdrawn, anxious boy was becoming someone else entirely, someone who had found his voice in the most literal sense, someone who had discovered a way to communicate that transcended his usual shyness and fear. The song built to a gentle crescendo, Leo's fingers dancing across the strings with increasing complexity, his voice soaring on the final chorus. So I'll keep singing until you find me. I'll keep playing until you're home. 'Cause love is the only map we need, and music lights the way back home. When the last note faded, the silence that followed was profound. Edward and Leo looked at each other across the small distance of their living room, and for the first time in 3 years, Edward felt like he was really seeing his son, not just the quiet, struggling kid he worried about, but the remarkable young person Leo was becoming despite his grief, despite the challenges, despite Edward's own failures to connect. Leo, Edward whispered, his voice thick with emotion. That was incredible. Leo's face lit up with a smile that Edward hadn't seen since before Sarah died. Do you think Mom would have liked how I finished it? Edward wiped his eyes and moved from the couch to sit on the floor beside his son. I think she would have been so proud she couldn't contain herself. I think she would have played it for everyone we know and bragged about her talented son until we were all embarrassed. Leo laughed, actually laughed, and the sound filled their house with something that had been missing for far too long. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. Dad, Leo said, still smiling, do you really want to learn to play? Because Mom always said you had good rhythm, even if your fingers were too stubborn for guitar strings. Edward looked at the Martin guitar, then at his work-roughened hands, then at his son's hopeful face. 3 years ago, the idea of learning music would have seemed impossible, impractical, a luxury he couldn't afford while trying to hold their lives together. But sitting here now, having just witnessed his son's transformation from invisible boy to confident musician, Edward realized that maybe music wasn't a luxury at all. Maybe it was exactly what they both needed to find their way back to each other. "Yeah," he said, reaching out to tentatively touch one of the guitar strings. "I really want to learn. Will you teach me?" Leo's grin was answer enough, but he nodded enthusiastically anyway. "We'll start tomorrow. And Dad, maybe we could practice together for the talent show, if you want to." As Edward looked at his son, really looked at him, maybe for the first time in months, he realized that everything had just changed. The catalyst wasn't just Leo's unexpected musical ability or the revelation about Sarah's hidden legacy. It was the moment when a father stopped trying to protect his son from the past and started helping him embrace it instead. Tomorrow, they would begin a journey neither of them had planned. But tonight, for the first time since Sarah died, their house felt like a home again. The next morning arrived grey and drizzling, the kind of November weather that made getting out of bed feel like an act of defiance against the universe. Edward woke before his alarm, his mind already racing with doubts about the promise he'd made to Leo the night before. In the harsh light of morning, his enthusiasm for learning guitar felt foolish, impractical, another well-intentioned commitment that would probably end in disappointment for both of them. He lay in bed for an extra 10 minutes, staring at the ceiling and listening to the rain tap against his bedroom window. His hands were already sore from yesterday's work. They'd been installing drywall on the 3rd floor of a new office building, and his fingers had that deep ache that came from gripping tools for 8 straight hours. How was he supposed to learn delicate finger-picking with hands that were better suited to swinging hammers? When he finally made it to the kitchen, Leo was already up, sitting at their small breakfast table with a bowl of cereal and an old guitar instruction book spread out beside him. The sight made Edward's chest tighten with a mixture of affection and anxiety. His son had clearly been up early, planning their first lesson with the kind of careful preparation that reminded Edward painfully of Sarah. "Morning, Dad," Leo said, without looking up from the book. "I found this in Mom's music stuff. It's got basic chord charts and everything." Edward poured himself coffee and glanced over Leo's shoulder at the book. The pages were filled with diagrams that looked like complicated mathematical equations, dots and lines and numbers that were supposed to represent finger positions on guitar strings. It might as well have been written in a foreign language. "Looks comprehensive," Edward said carefully. Leo finally looked up, his dark eyes bright with excitement. "I thought we could start with just 3 chords. That's all you need for most songs, Mom always said. C major, G major, and F major. Once you can switch between those smoothly, you can play hundreds of songs." Edward sat down across from Leo, trying to match his son's enthusiasm while privately wondering what he'd gotten himself into. The guitar was propped against the wall nearby, and just looking at it made his fingers feel clumsy and inadequate. He was 42 years old, for crying out loud. His brain wasn't wired for learning new tricks, especially not musical ones. "About that," Edward began slowly. "Leo, I want you to know that this might take me a while to pick up. I'm not exactly what you'd call naturally musical." Leo's face fell slightly. "Are you changing your mind? Because it's okay if you don't want to." "No," Edward said quickly. "No, I want to learn. I just want to make sure you don't get frustrated with me when I can't keep up. Your mom had natural talent. I might be more of a project." The truth was Edward was terrified of failing at this. Everything else in his relationship with Leo had been about practical things, making sure he ate enough vegetables, got his homework done, had clean clothes for school. Those were tasks with clear, success metrics, but music was different. Music required vulnerability, creativity, emotional expression, all the things that Edward had been carefully avoiding for the past 3 years. What if he was terrible at it? What if his clumsy attempts at playing ruined the beautiful moment they'd shared the night before? What if Leo realized that his father was just as lost and broken as he was, just better at hiding it? Leo studied his father's face with the kind of perceptive intensity that always surprised Edward. Sometimes he forgot how intuitive his son was, how carefully he watched the adults around him for signs of what was really going on beneath the surface. "Dad," Leo said softly, "you know when Dylan Martinez dared me to bring the guitar to school?" Edward nodded. "I almost didn't do it. I sat in my room for like an hour yesterday morning, holding the case, thinking about all the ways it could go wrong. What if I forgot the chords? What if my voice cracked? What if everyone laughed at me even more than they already do?" Edward leaned forward, surprised by this glimpse into his son's inner world. "What made you decide to go through with it?" Leo shrugged, but his eyes were serious. "I kept thinking about what Mom used to say when I was scared to try something new. She said being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the thing anyway, even though you're scared." The simple wisdom of it hit Edward like a punch to the gut. Here was his 11-year-old son who had faced down a room full of skeptical classmates and bullies, offering him the same courage that Sarah had once given them both. How had he not seen how much strength Leo had been developing on his own? "Besides," Leo continued, "even if you're not good at first, we'll be learning together. That's different than trying to do it alone." Edward looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw Sarah's compassion mixed with a resilience that was uniquely Leo's own. This boy, who barely spoke above a whisper in most situations, was offering to be his teacher, his partner, his guide into a world that had always seemed closed. Off to Edward, but the doubt still crowded his mind. He thought about his work schedule, long days that left him exhausted and short-tempered. He thought about the calluses on his fingertips that might make pressing guitar strings painful. He thought about the neighbors who might hear them practicing and wonder what kind of noise was coming from the Fisher house. Most of all, he thought about the talent show that Leo had mentioned. The idea of performing in public made Edward's stomach churn. He'd spent most of his adult life trying to avoid being the center of attention, preferring the background role of provider and protector. The thought of standing on a stage in front of other parents, other families who had their acts together, felt like signing up for public humiliation. "Leo," Edward said carefully, "about the talent show. Even if I learned to play a few chords, I'm not sure I'm ready for performing in front of people." Leo's face fell again, more dramatically this time. "Oh, okay, I just thought, since you said you wanted to learn backup." Edward could see the disappointment settling over his son like a heavy blanket. It was the same expression Leo got when other kids didn't include him in playground games, or when birthday party invitations went to everyone in class except him. Edward recognized it because he'd been seeing it more and more frequently over the past few months, and each time it appeared, he felt like he was failing his son in some fundamental way. "It's not that I don't want to," Edward said quickly. "It's just that performing is a big step. Maybe we should focus on learning the basics first and see how it goes." Leo nodded, but the spark of excitement had dimmed considerably. "Sure, that makes sense." They sat in awkward silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken expectations hanging between them. Edward could see that Leo had been envisioning something more than just casual lessons. He'd been imagining a partnership, a shared adventure, that would culminate in them standing together on stage like he used to do with Sarah. The fact that Edward was already putting limitations on that dream felt like another small betrayal. But the alternative, committing to something he might not be able to deliver, seemed worse. Edward had learned to be careful with promises after Sarah died. Leo had already lost so much, Edward couldn't bear the thought of adding another disappointment to that list. "Maybe we should start small," Edward suggested. "Just you teaching me a few chords. See if these old fingers can handle it. We don't have to make any big plans right away." Leo picked at his cereal, not meeting Edward's eyes. "Yeah, okay, small steps." The phrase hung in the air like a compromise that satisfied no one. Edward knew he was being cautious to the point of cowardice, but the stakes felt impossibly high. This wasn't just about learning to play guitar, it was about whether he could be the kind of father Leo needed, whether he could step into the role that Sarah had filled so naturally, whether he could help his son heal without breaking something precious in the process. Outside, the rain was getting heavier, drumming against the kitchen window with increasing intensity. Edward thought about calling in sick to work, spending the day with Leo, maybe making a real start on those guitar lessons. But then he thought about the project deadline at Hartwell and Associates, the crew counting on him, the bills that wouldn't pay themselves if he started taking days off for music lessons. "I should get ready for work," Edward said, standing up from the table. "But maybe tonight after dinner, you could show me those chord charts." Leo brightened slightly. "Really? You want to try tonight?" "I want to try," Edward confirmed, though his voice carried more determination than confidence. "Just be patient with me, okay? I'm probably going to be pretty terrible at first." Leo grinned, and for a moment he looked like the carefree kid he'd been before Sarah died. "That's okay, Dad. Mom always said the best songs come from places that hurt a little at first." As Edward headed upstairs to get ready for work, he wondered if Leo realized how profound that statement was. Maybe learning to play music would hurt. His fingers, his pride, his carefully constructed walls around the grief he'd been avoiding. But maybe, just maybe, that hurt would be worth it if it helped him find his way back to his son. The question was whether he was brave enough to find out. That evening, Edward sat at his kitchen table, staring at the Martin guitar as if it were a wild animal that might bite him if he moved too quickly. Leo had positioned it carefully against the chair beside him, and the late afternoon light streaming through their window made the polished wood gleam like honey. It was beautiful, Edward had to admit, the kind of instrument that looked like it belonged in the hands of someone who actually knew what they were doing. "Okay," Leo said, settling into his chair with the instruction book open between them. "The first thing Mom always taught people was how to hold the guitar properly. Most beginners think it's about the hands, but it's really about how you position your whole body." Edward reached for the guitar hesitantly, his calloused fingers feeling clumsy against the smooth neck. The instrument was heavier than he'd expected, and awkward in his arms, like trying to embrace someone he'd just met. "No, Dad, turn it the other way," Leo said gently. "The big part goes against your body, and the skinny part points away from you." Edward repositioned the guitar, immediately feeling more foolish. "Like this? Better. Now put your right arm over the top so your hand hangs over the strings naturally. Don't grip the neck too tight with your left hand. You want to be able to move your fingers freely." For the next 20 minutes, Leo patiently adjusted Edward's posture, showing him how to cradle the guitar without tensing up his shoulders, how to position his thumb on the back of the neck, how to curve his fingers so they could press down on the strings without accidentally muting the ones next to them. It was like learning a completely new language with his body, and Edward found himself sweating with concentration despite the cool November evening. "This is harder than it looks," Edward muttered, trying to hold the C major chord that Leo had shown him for the third time. "Your fingers need to build up strength," Leo explained. "Mum said it's like going to the gym, but for your hands. The muscles have to learn where to go and how hard to press." Edward attempted to strum the chord, and instead of the clear, ringing sound that Leo produced so effortlessly, He got a dull thunk mixed with the buzzing of strings that weren't pressed down firmly enough. "That's normal," Leo said quickly, seeing his father's frustrated expression. "The first month is always rough. Mom used to say that every guitarist goes through the wounded animal phase where everything sounds terrible." Despite his embarrassment, Edward found himself smiling at that. He could imagine Sarah saying exactly that, probably while demonstrating some impossibly complex finger-picking pattern that made everything look easy. They spent another hour working on just 3 chords, C major, G major, and the dreaded F major, which required Edward to press down multiple strings with his index finger in a way that felt like it might break his hand in half. By the time they stopped for dinner, Edward's fingertips were red and sore, and he was pretty sure he'd managed to play each chord cleanly maybe twice out of 50 attempts. But something unexpected had happened during that hour of struggle and repetition. For the first time in months, maybe years, Edward had been completely present with his son. There had been no thoughts about work deadlines, no worry about bills or schedules, or any of the 1,000 small crises that usually occupied his mind. There had been just this moment, Leo's patient voice, the feeling of the strings under his fingers, the slow, incremental progress that felt like building something important, one small piece at a time. After dinner, Leo disappeared into his room and returned with a small notebook and a pen. "What's that for?" Edward asked. "Practice log," Leo said seriously. "Mom kept one when she was learning new songs. You write down what you worked on, what was hard, what got better. It helps you see progress when you feel like you're not getting anywhere." Edward watched his son write, "Day 1, C, G, F chords. Dad's fingers need work, but good posture," in careful handwriting at the top of the first page. The simple act of documenting their lesson made it feel official somehow, like a real commitment rather than just an experiment they might abandon when things got difficult. "Leo," Edward said, setting down his coffee cup, "I need to ask you something." Leo looked up from the notebook. "Why is this so important to you? The guitar, the talent show, all of it. I want to understand." Leo was quiet for a long moment, his pen poised over the paper. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than usual. "After Mom died, I felt like part of me died too. The part that knew how to talk to people, how to be brave, how to do anything that mattered. But when I play her guitar, when I sing, the songs we worked on together, I feel like she's still here, like maybe I'm not as broken as I thought." Edward's chest tightened. He'd known Leo was struggling, but hearing it put so plainly made him realize how much his son had been carrying alone. "At school, everyone thinks I'm weird because I don't talk much, and I don't like the same things they do. But yesterday, when I played for the class, they listened, really listened. For 5 minutes, I wasn't the weird, quiet kid. I was someone who could make something beautiful." Leo looked up at his father with eyes that seemed older than 11. "I know the talent show is scary. I know we might mess up, but I thought maybe if we did it together, it would be less scary for both of us. And maybe other people would see that we're not just the sad family that lost their mom. Maybe they'd see that we're still here, still trying to make music." Edward stared at his son, overwhelmed by the courage and wisdom in those words. Here was this boy who barely spoke above a whisper in most situations, who avoided eye contact with classmates and teachers, articulating something profound about grief and healing and the power of shared vulnerability. "You know what?" Edward said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're right about all of it." Leo blinked in surprise. "Really?" Edward nodded, feeling something shift inside his chest. A door opening that had been locked for 3 years. "Really? I've been so focused on protecting you from getting hurt that I forgot you might also be protecting me. We've both been playing. It's safe, haven't we? Keeping quiet, keeping to ourselves, not taking any risks." Leo nodded. "But safe isn't the same as alive." Edward continued, thinking of Sarah and how she'd never chosen the safe option when it came to music, love, or parenting. Your mum didn't teach you to play guitar so you could keep it hidden in your bedroom. She taught you because music is meant to be shared. Edward reached across the table and took the pen from Leo's hand. Under his son's first entry, he wrote, "Goal, father-son performance at Winter Talent Show. Timeline, 6 weeks. Commitment, daily practice no matter what." Leo's eyes widened as he read the words. "Dad, are you sure? What if we're not ready?" "What if, then we'll mess up together," Edward interrupted, "and we'll get back up and try again. That's what families do." For the first time since Sarah's death, Edward felt like he was making a promise he could keep, not because it would be easy, but because it mattered enough to be worth the effort. He looked at his son's face, saw the mixture of excitement and terror there, and recognized it as the same feeling churning in his own chest. They were really going to do this. A construction worker with no musical experience and a shy 11-year-old boy were going to stand on a stage in front of their community and attempt to make something beautiful together. It was absolutely terrifying. It was also exactly what they both needed. "So," Edward said, picking up the guitar again and positioning it in his arms, the way Leo had taught him, "show me that F chord one more time. If we're doing this, we might as well do it right." Leo beamed and scooted his chair closer. "Okay, but remember, curve your fingers like you're holding a tennis ball and press down right behind the fret, not on top of it." As Edward struggled once again with the impossible geometry of the F chord, he realized that this moment, this commitment to step outside his comfort zone for his son's sake, felt like the first truly brave thing he'd done since Sarah died. It was a start. 2 weeks into their nightly guitar lessons, Edward's fingertips had developed the kind of calluses that came from pressing steel strings against wooden frets for hours at a time. The pain had been excruciating at first, like tiny knives slicing into his skin with every chord change. But now, there was just a dull ache that reminded him of the progress he was slowly, incrementally making. Their evening routine had become sacred. Every night after dinner and homework, they would clear the kitchen table, set up Leo's practice notebook, and spend an hour working through chord progressions, strumming patterns, and the basic mechanics of making music together. Edward had surprised himself by how much he looked forward to these sessions, even on days when work had beaten him down and his fingers felt too stiff to bend properly. "Okay, Dad, try the progression again," Leo said, his own guitar balanced across his lap. "C to G to A, minor to F. Remember, you don't have to rush the chord changes. It's better to be slow and clean than fast and sloppy." Edward positioned his fingers carefully on the fretboard, his brow furrowed in concentration. The C chord came easily now. His muscle memory had finally absorbed the simple finger positions. G major was getting smoother too, though he still had to think about where each finger needed to land. A minor was his favorite because it was essentially G major with one finger moved, which felt like cheating in the best possible way. But F major, that hateful F major, still fought him every single time. "Take your time," Leo encouraged, watching his father struggle with the bar chord that required pressing down all 6 strings with his index finger while maintaining the proper positioning for the rest of his hand. Edward pressed down, adjusted. His thumb position on the back of the neck pressed down harder and finally managed to get something that resembled the proper sound. He strummed carefully, and for once, all 6 strings rang out clearly. "Yes," Leo cheered, clapping his hands. "That was perfect." Edward grinned, feeling ridiculously proud of himself for managing something that probably took most guitarists a few days to master. But there was something addictive about the challenge, about the way his brain had to coordinate with his hands in completely new ways, about the moment when muscle memory finally clicked and his fingers found their positions. Without conscious thought, Let's try it with the song, Leo suggested, flipping through the songbook they'd been working from. I want to try Wonderwall again. It uses the same progression. They'd been working on the Oasis song for a week now, partly because Leo had heard other kids at school talking about it, and partly because it was simple enough for Edward to manage while still sounding like a real song that people might recognize. Leo sang the melody while Edward played the basic chord progression, their two guitars creating a fuller sound than either could achieve alone. Edward still struggled with the transitions. There was always a slight pause between chords while his fingers found their new positions, but Leo had learned to adjust his timing to match his father's rhythm. They were becoming a team in a way that Edward hadn't expected, each compensating for the other's weaknesses and playing to their strengths. "You're getting really good at this," Leo said, after they'd made it through the entire song without any major mistakes. "I think we're almost ready to start working on something for the talent show." Edward set down his guitar and flexed his fingers. What did you have in mind? Leo had been thinking about this, Edward could tell. His son got a particular expression when he was working through a complex idea, the same focused intensity that Sarah used to get when she was composing. "I want to do Finding Home," Leo said. "The song Mom and I wrote together, but I want to arrange it so we're both playing guitar, not just me singing and you doing backup." Edward felt a flutter of panic. "Leo, I don't know if I'm ready for anything that complicated. I can barely manage simple chord progressions." "That's the thing," Leo said, pulling out a piece of paper covered with his careful handwriting. "I've been working on a simplified arrangement. You would play the basic chord progression, the same chords we've been practicing, and I would do the melody line and the more complex finger-picking parts." Edward looked at the chord chart Leo had written out. It was indeed the same progression. They'd been working on C, G, A minor, F, with a few variations in the bridge. On paper, it looked manageable, but the thought of performing it in front of an audience still made his stomach clench. "The thing is," Leo continued, "this song means something to both of us. It's not just a random song we picked because it was easy. It's Mom's song, our song, and I think if we're going to do this, it should be something that matters." Edward studied his son's face, seeing the determination there mixed with vulnerability. Leo was right. They could probably find an easier song to perform, something more crowd-pleasing or technically simple. But Finding Home carried emotional weight that would make the performance meaningful regardless of how perfectly they executed it. "Okay," Edward said, surprised by his own certainty. "Let's do it. But we'll need to practice it a lot." "I mean, a lot. Leo's face lit up. "Really? You're not just saying that?" "I'm terrified," Edward admitted, "but yeah, I'm in." They spent the rest of the evening working through the basic structure of the song, with Leo singing the melody while Edward focused solely on keeping the chord progression steady. It was harder than Wonderwall. The timing was more complex, and there were a few chord changes that came faster than Edward was comfortable with, but there was something magical about hearing Sarah's words sung in Leo's voice, while his own hands provided the musical foundation. By the time they called it a night, Edward's fingers were cramping, and his head was spinning with chord charts and timing patterns. But as he lay in bed that night, he found himself humming the melody of Finding Home and mentally rehearsing the finger positions for the chord changes. The next few days brought a new intensity to their practice sessions. Leo had become a surprisingly effective teacher, patient but demanding, encouraging but honest about areas where Edward needed improvement. He would demonstrate techniques multiple times, break down complex passages into smaller pieces, and celebrate small victories with genuine enthusiasm. "Your strumming pattern is getting much more consistent," Leo observed during their Thursday night practice, "but you're still tensing up during the F chord transitions. Try to keep your shoulders relaxed." Edward had started bringing his guitar to work, practicing basic chord changes during his lunch break while sitting in his truck. His co-workers at Hartwell and Associates had initially teased him about his new hobby, but Frank Kelly, the site foreman, had surprised everyone by revealing that he'd played bass in a blues band during his 20s. "Music gets in your blood," Frank had told Edward one afternoon while they were installing crown molding in what would become a conference room. "Once it's there, it never really leaves. Your boy's lucky to have a dad who's willing to learn alongside him." The comment had stuck with Edward, partly because it suggested that what he was doing wasn't just indulgent or impractical, but actually valuable in ways he might not have considered. He was modeling something for Leo, the willingness to be vulnerable, to struggle with something difficult, to risk failure for the sake of connection. At home, their practice sessions had started attracting an audience of one. Mrs. Chen from next door, who had begun timing her evening garden work to coincide with their music time. She would water her plants or deadhead her flowers while listening to them play, occasionally offering encouraging comments over the fence. "You two sound wonderful together," she had said the previous evening. "It reminds me of when my husband and I used to play piano duets. There's something special about making music with someone you love." Edward had felt a flush of pride at the compliment, mixed with amazement that their stumbling efforts could sound like something worth listening to, but he was beginning to understand that the technical perfection wasn't really the point. The point was the connection, the shared effort, the way music had given them a new language for expressing things that were too big or too complicated for regular words. By the end of their third week, Edward could play through Finding Home without stopping, though his chord changes were still clunky and his rhythm sometimes wavered. Leo had been working on his own part as well, adding subtle finger-picking patterns during the verses and a more assertive strumming pattern during the chorus. When they played together now, it actually sounded like a cohesive song rather than two separate people playing in the same room. "I think we're ready to record ourselves," Leo suggested during their Friday night practice, "just so we can hear how we sound from the outside." Edward felt a spike of anxiety at the suggestion. Recording felt too much like making it official, like creating evidence of their attempt that could be judged or criticized. But Leo was already setting up his phone to capture their performance, and Edward realized that this was another small step in the process of becoming brave enough to eventually perform for strangers. They played through Finding Home once, and when Leo played back the recording, Edward was amazed by what he heard. Yes, his playing was still rough around the edges, and yes, there were moments where the timing got slightly off, but there was also something undeniably moving about the combination of Leo's clear, emotional vocals and their two guitars weaving together to create something larger than either could achieve alone. "We sound like a real band," Edward said, shaking his head in wonder. Leo grinned. "We are a real band. We're the Fisher family band." As they packed up their guitars that night, Edward realized that somewhere in the past 3 weeks, something fundamental had shifted in their relationship. They had become partners in this endeavor, equals in their vulnerability and commitment. Leo was no longer just his son who needed protection and guidance. He was also his teacher, his collaborator, his fellow traveler on a journey toward something neither of them fully understood yet. It was terrifying and wonderful and completely different from anything Edward had ever imagined for their lives. And they were just getting started. 3.5 weeks into their musical partnership, just as Edward was beginning to feel cautiously optimistic about their progress, the first real setback arrived in the form of a phone call from Hartwell and Associates on a Tuesday evening. Edward was in the middle of practicing a particularly tricky chord transition when his cell phone rang, displaying Frank Kelly's name on the screen. "Edward, we've got a problem." Frank's voice was tense, all business. "The Riverside Plaza project just got moved up." Client wants the whole thing finished by December 15th instead of January. That means mandatory overtime starting tomorrow. 10-hour days, 6 days a week until it's done. Edward felt his stomach drop. How long are we talking about? At least 3 weeks, maybe 4. I know it's not ideal timing with the holidays coming up, but this is $1 million contract. We can't afford to lose it. Edward glanced across the kitchen at Leo, who was tuning his guitar and humming quietly to himself, oblivious to the conversation that was about to upend their carefully constructed routine. The talent show was exactly 4 weeks away, and they had been counting on their daily practice sessions to get ready. Missing even a few days would set them back significantly, but missing 3 weeks would be devastating. I understand, Edward said, though his voice felt hollow. When do we start? Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. sharp. And Edward, I'm sorry about this. I know you've got something going on with your boy. After Edward hung up, Leo looked up from his guitar with curious eyes. Everything okay, Dad? Edward sat down heavily in his chair, trying to figure out how to explain this without crushing the hope that had been building in Leo's expression over the past month. There's been a change at work. We're going to have some longer days for the next few weeks. Leo's face fell slightly. How much longer? 10 hours instead of 8, and Saturdays too. Edward watched as Leo did the math in his head, calculating what this meant for their practice schedule. Their evening sessions usually started around 7:30 and ran until 8:30 or 9. If Edward was working until 6 and then needed time to eat dinner and decompress, they'd be lucky to get 30 minutes together before Leo's bedtime. Oh, Leo said quietly. That's okay. We can still practice a little bit each night, right? Right? Edward's chest tightened at the forced optimism in his son's voice. Leo, I'm going to be pretty exhausted when I get home. And you have school, homework? I can do my homework faster, Leo interrupted. And maybe we could practice in the mornings. I could wake up earlier. The desperate eagerness in Leo's suggestion broke Edward's heart. His son was willing to sacrifice sleep, to restructure his entire routine just to keep their musical partnership alive. But Edward knew how brutal 10-hour construction days were, especially as winter weather made the work more difficult and dangerous. He'd come home drained, sore, and in no condition to concentrate on delicate fingerwork or complex timing. We'll figure something out, Edward said, but even he could hear the lack of conviction in his voice. The next morning arrived dark and cold, with the kind of November frost that made Edward's hands ache before he even picked up a tool. He left the house at 5:30 a.m., kissing Leo's forehead as his son slept, and didn't return until nearly 7 p.m. By the time he walked through the front door, his fingers were stiff from cold and exhaustion. His back ached from lifting heavy materials, and his mind felt foggy with fatigue. Leo was waiting for him in the kitchen, both guitars set up hopefully beside the table, homework already completed and stacked neatly to one side. Ready for practice? Leo asked brightly, though Edward could see the uncertainty lurking behind his smile. Edward looked at his hands, grimy with drywall dust, stiff from gripping tools all day, already cramping from overuse. He tried to make a simple C chord and winced as his fingers protested the movement. Give me a few minutes to clean up, he said, heading toward the bathroom to wash his hands and splash cold water on his face. When he returned, Leo had arranged their practice materials with optimistic efficiency. Chord charts, the practice notebook, even a thermos of coffee that he'd prepared for his father. The sight of his son's careful preparations made Edward feel even worse about what he was about to discover. They attempted to run through their usual warm-up exercises, but Edward's fingers felt like sausages on the fretboard. Chord changes that had become relatively smooth over the past few weeks now felt clumsy and uncertain. His timing was off, his strumming pattern inconsistent, and the F chord, that perpetual nemesis, seemed to have become completely impossible again. "It's okay, Dad," Leo said after Edward fumbled through the same passage for the third time. "You're just tired. Tomorrow will be better." But tomorrow wasn't better. Neither was the day after that, or the day after that. As the brutal work schedule continued, Edward found himself arriving home increasingly exhausted, his hands increasingly uncooperative, his patience increasingly thin. What had been a joyful evening ritual became a frustrating reminder of his limitations. By the end of the first week, their practice sessions had dwindled to 15-minute attempts that left both of them discouraged. Edward would struggle through a few chord progressions, make mistakes that he hadn't made in weeks, and then apologize for being too tired to continue. Leo would nod understandingly and put away the guitars, but Edward could see the disappointment accumulating in his son's eyes. "Maybe we should take a break until after the project is finished," Edward suggested after a particularly disastrous practice session. "Give my hands time to recover." Leo looked stricken. "But the talent show is in 3 weeks. If we stop practicing now, we'll never be ready." "Leo, I don't know if we're going to be ready anyway. Maybe we should consider—" "No," Leo interrupted, his voice sharper than Edward had ever heard it. "We can't quit. We promised." Edward saw something flash across his son's face, not just disappointment, but a deeper fear. The fear that, once again, circumstances beyond his control were going to take away something that mattered to him. The fear that the adult in his life was going to let him down, just like the world had let him down when it took his mother. "I'm not quitting," Edward said carefully. "I'm just being realistic about what we can accomplish in the next few weeks." But even as he said it, Edward knew that from Leo's perspective, there wasn't much difference between being realistic and giving up. His son had taken an enormous risk by allowing himself to hope for this shared performance, by believing that they could create something beautiful together despite their limitations. Now Edward was asking him to scale back that hope, to accept less than what they had dreamed of. That night, Edward lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his hands aching and his mind racing. Through the thin walls of their house, he could hear Leo in his room, playing his guitar softly, not their practice songs, but something new and melancholy that seemed to express all the frustration and sadness that his son was too polite to voice directly. The melody was beautiful and heartbreaking, and Edward realized that Leo was continuing to grow as a musician even while their partnership floundered. His son didn't need him to make music. Leo had talent and passion enough to carry himself forward. What he needed was a father who would keep his promises, who would find a way to show up even when it was difficult. By Thursday of the second week, Edward was beginning to panic. The talent show was 18 days away and they had barely touched their guitars in a week. Leo had stopped asking about practice and had started spending his evenings in his room, playing alone. The careful optimism that had characterized their musical journey was being replaced by a familiar pattern of disappointment and withdrawal. Edward knew he was losing his son again, not to tragedy this time, but to his own limitations and poor planning. He had made a promise that he was failing to keep, and every day that passed made the failure more complete. On Friday evening, as Edward sat in his truck outside their house, too tired to even go inside, he made a decision that surprised him with its clarity. He pulled out his phone and called Frank Kelly. "Frank, it's Edward. I need to talk to you about the overtime schedule." "What's up? You're not thinking of backing out, are you? Because I really need—" "No, I'm not backing out, but I need to leave by 5:30 every day instead of 6. I know it's only 30 minutes, but I've got something important I need to do with my son." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Edward, you know I can't make exceptions. If word gets out that—" "Then don't pay me for the last 30 minutes, Edward interrupted. "Dock me the time, I don't care, but I need to be home by 6, Frank. This is important." Another pause, longer this time. "This is about that music thing, isn't it? The talent show?" "Yeah, it's about keeping a promise to my kid," Frank sighed. "All right. But you make up the time during lunch and you don't say anything to the other guys about special treatment." "Deal." As Edward hung up the phone, he realized that he had just made a choice that surprised him. He had chosen Leo's dream over overtime pay, chosen keeping a promise over avoiding confrontation with his boss, chosen the possibility of musical partnership over the safety of maintaining the status quo. It wasn't enough to solve all their problems, but it was a start. And sometimes Edward was learning a start was all you needed to remember why you had begun the journey in the first place. When he walked into the house that evening, Leo was in his room practicing alone, as he had been every night that week. But this time Edward knocked on the door and entered with his own guitar in hand. "Feel like some company?" he asked. Leo looked up, surprised and cautious. "I thought you were too tired." "I'm always going to be tired," Edward said, settling onto the floor beside his son's bed. "But tired isn't the same as unavailable. Let's see if these old fingers remember anything." As they tuned their guitars together, Edward felt something shift between them, not back to where they had been before the complications arose, but forward to a new understanding of what commitment really meant. It meant showing up even when it was hard, even when you weren't at your best, even when the circumstances weren't ideal. It meant choosing each other again and again, until the choosing became as natural as breathing. Saturday morning brought an unexpected visitor to the Fisher household. Edward was in the kitchen making pancakes, a weekend tradition he'd maintained even through the exhausting work weeks, when the doorbell rang. Leo, still in his pajamas and hair sticking up at odd angles, padded to the front door and peered through the peephole. "Dad, there's a lady here I don't recognize," Leo called out, his voice carrying that particular caution that had become his default with strangers since Sarah's death. Edward wiped his hands on a dish towel and joined his son at the door. Through the glass, he could see a woman in her late 30s, with auburn hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, wearing jeans and a green sweater. She looked nervous but determined, clutching a manila envelope against her chest like a shield. When Edward opened the door, the woman's eyes immediately went to Leo, and Edward saw something flicker across her face. Recognition mixed with something deeper, more complex. "Mr. Fisher, my name is Clara Hill. I was Sarah's friend from before." Her voice was soft but steady, with a kind of careful composure that suggested she'd rehearsed this moment multiple times. "I know this is unexpected, but I was hoping we could talk about Leo, about his music. Edward felt his stomach tighten. Sarah had had many friends before Leo was born, before their life had narrowed to focus on work and family and the everyday routine of building a life together. But most of those friendships had faded during the busy years of new parenthood. And after Sarah's death, Edward had been too overwhelmed to maintain connections with people who reminded him of everything he'd lost. "I'm sorry," Edward said carefully, "but I don't think I remember Sarah mentioning you." Clara's smile was sad but understanding. "That's because she didn't. Not to you, anyway. May I come in? What I have to tell you, it's complicated and it's important." Leo tugged on Edward's sleeve. "Dad, she knows about my music." "How does she know about my music?" Edward looked down at his son, then back at Clara, whose expression had grown more urgent. "Please," she said. "I drove 3 hours to get here, and there are things you both need to know. Things about Sarah that she asked me to keep secret until the time was right." Against his better judgment, Edward stepped aside to let her in. Clara entered their small living room and looked around with the kind of careful attention that suggested she was seeing something she'd only heard described. Her eyes lingered on the guitars propped against the wall, the sheet music scattered across the coffee table, the practice notebook that Leo had left open to their latest session notes. "You two have been working hard," she observed. settling into the chair that Edward gestured toward. Sarah would be so proud. "How do you know about our practice?" Leo asked, perching on the edge of the couch with the wary curiosity that Edward recognized as his son's way of processing potentially important information. Clara took a deep breath and opened the manila envelope she'd been carrying. From it, she withdrew several items: a stack of letters tied with a blue ribbon, a small digital camera, and what looked like a CD in a plastic case. "Your mother and I were roommates in college," Clara began, her eyes moving between Edward and Leo. "We were both music majors, both dreaming of careers that seemed impossible for small-town girls. We stayed close even after graduation, even after she met your father and started building a different kind of life." Edward frowned. Sarah studied business administration. She never mentioned being a music major. Clara's expression grew pained. "That's part of what I need to tell you. Sarah did study business, but only after she changed her major junior year. She was originally planning to be a music therapist, specializing in working with children who had experienced trauma." She pulled one of the letters from the stack and held it carefully, as if it contained something fragile. "When Leo was born, Sarah started writing to me again. Not emails or phone calls, actual letters. She said she needed to document things, to make sure someone else knew the whole story in case something ever happened to her." Edward felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of things? Things about Leo's musical abilities. Things about her own dreams that she'd set aside. Things about a plan she'd been developing for Leo's future that she wasn't ready to share with you yet. Clara looked directly at Leo, her expression growing gentle. "Your mother knew you were special from the time you were 3 years old. Not just musically gifted, but special in a way that went beyond normal talent. She started keeping recordings of you humming, singing, making up songs. She documented everything." Clara held up the digital camera. "There are over 200 videos. On here, Leo singing lullabies to his stuffed animals. Leo making up songs about his toys. Leo harmonizing with songs on the radio before he was old enough to understand what harmony was." Edward stared at the camera, trying to process this information. "Why didn't she show me any of this?" "Because she was afraid," Clara said simply. "Sarah grew up in a family that didn't understand artistic dreams. Her parents pushed her away from music, convinced her it was impractical, that she needed to focus on something that would provide financial security. When she met you, Edward, she was already carrying the weight of having given up on her own musical aspirations." Clara pulled out another letter, this one shorter than the others. In this letter, written when Leo was 4, Sarah talks about her fears that you would react the same way her parents did, that you would see Leo's musical gifts as something cute, but ultimately impractical. She was terrified of putting him in a position where he might be discouraged from pursuing something that came so naturally to him. Edward felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. "She thought I would discourage him. I would never." "She knew that," Clara interrupted gently. "Intellectually, she knew you would support Leo in whatever made him happy. But fear isn't always rational, especially when it's rooted in old wounds. She was planning to talk to you about it when Leo got older, when his abilities became too obvious to ignore. Leo had been silent through this exchange, but now he spoke up, his voice small and confused. Mom was afraid of Dad, but they loved each other." Clara smiled at him with infinite tenderness. "Oh, sweetheart, your parents loved each other more than most people love anything in their entire lives. Your mother wasn't afraid of your father. She was afraid of her own past, of old hurts that had nothing to do with him." She held up the CD. "This is the last thing she sent me, about 2 months before the accident. It's a recording of you and her working on finding home together. She said in her letter that she'd finally decided to talk to your father about everything. She was going to tell him about your gifts, about her own musical background, about the plans she'd been making for your future. Edward's throat felt tight. What kind of plans? Music therapy certification for herself, private lessons for Leo, with some of the best teachers in the state, maybe even early admission to specialized music programs when he got older. She'd been researching, saving money, building a whole roadmap for nurturing Leo's talents without putting pressure on him to perform or compete. Clara handed the CD to Leo, who took it with reverent hands. She recorded this 2 weeks before she died. She wanted me to have it in case anything ever happened, so that someday you would know how much joy your music brought her, and how proud she was of the person you were becoming. Edward stood up abruptly, pacing to the window as he tried to absorb everything Clara had told them. Sarah had been living a parallel life that he'd known nothing about, documenting their son's development, planning for his future, carrying dreams and fears that she'd never shared with him. "Why are you telling us this now?" he asked, not turning around. "Because of the talent show," Clara said. "Sarah's sister Madeline called me last week. She'd heard through the school grapevine about you and Leo performing together, and she thought I should know. She said Sarah would have wanted me to make sure you understood what you were doing, not just learning songs together, but stepping into the musical legacy that Sarah had been carefully preserving for both of you." Edward turned back to face Clara, seeing her clearly for the first time since she'd arrived. "You're a music therapist, aren't you?" Clara nodded. "I run a program for children who've experienced loss. When I heard about what you and Leo were doing, father and son healing through music after losing the woman who connected them both to it, I knew I had to come. Not to interfere, but to give you the context that Sarah never got the chance to provide." Leo was staring at the CD in his hands, tears beginning to form in his eyes. "Can we listen to it?" he whispered. Clara looked at Edward, who nodded slowly. Whatever was on that recording, whatever final message Sarah had left for them, it was time to hear it. As Clara set up her laptop and inserted the CD, Edward realized that everything was about to change again. Just as they'd found their rhythm, together, just as they'd begun to understand what they were building, Sarah's voice was going to enter their story and rewrite everything they thought they knew about their family, their music, and their connection to each other. The first notes of Finding Home began to play through the laptop speakers, but it was Sarah's voice singing the melody, Sarah's guitar providing the foundation, and 4-year-old Leo's pure, untrained voice joining in perfect harmony on the chorus. Edward sank into his chair as the recording played, understanding for the first time that what he and Leo had been building together wasn't just their own creation. It was the completion of something Sarah had started years ago, a musical bridge between past and future that she'd constructed with love, patience, and the kind of faith that transcends even death. When the song ended, the three of them sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts about love, loss, and the mysterious ways that music can carry the most important messages across seemingly impossible distances. Finally, Leo looked up at Clara with eyes that seemed older than his 11 years. "Do you think Mom knew that we would find each other through her songs?" Clara smiled through her tears. "Sweetheart, I think your mother knew exactly what she was doing. She was just giving you and your father the tools you would need to find your way back to each other when you were ready." Edward reached over and pulled his son into a fierce hug, finally understanding that their musical journey had never been about learning to play guitar or preparing for a talent show. It had been about discovering the family they'd always been, but had forgotten how to see. The gymnasium at Lincoln Elementary had been transformed for the winter talent show. Red and gold streamers hung from the basketball hoops, and a makeshift stage had been constructed at the far end of the room where folding chairs were arranged. In neat rows, Parents, siblings, and friends filled every available seat, their conversations creating a warm buzz that bounced off the walls and high ceiling. Edward stood in the cramped hallway that served as a backstage area, tuning his guitar. For the third time in 10 minutes, his hands were steady, steadier than they'd been in weeks, but his stomach felt like it was hosting a gymnastics competition. Around them, other performers waited their turn, a group of fifth-grade girls practicing a synchronized dance routine, twin brothers arguing over who would announce their magic act, and a serious-looking fourth-grader reviewing notes for what appeared to be a science demonstration. Leo sat cross-legged on the floor beside him, his own guitar balanced across his lap, eyes closed in the kind of meditative concentration that Edward had learned to recognize as his son's way of managing anxiety. They were scheduled to perform 7th out of 12 acts, which Leo had calculated as the optimal position, late enough that people would be settled and attentive, but early enough that they wouldn't have to endure too much waiting. Fisher, "Family, you're up in 5 minutes," called Mrs. Patterson, the school counselor who was coordinating the backstage logistics. She gave them an encouraging smile. "How are you two feeling?" "Terrified," Edward answered honestly, then looked down at Leo. "How about you, buddy?" Leo opened his eyes and considered the question seriously. "Scared, but the good kind of scared. Like when you're about to go down a really big slide and you know it's going to be amazing, but your stomach still does flips." Edward marveled at his son's ability to articulate feelings that he could barely sort through himself. Over the past 2 weeks since Clara's visit had recontextualized everything they thought they knew about their musical journey, Leo had seemed to grow into his confidence in ways that surprised everyone around him. He still spoke quietly in most situations, still preferred the company of books to large groups of children. But when it came to music, he'd found a voice that was entirely his own. They'd spent every available moment since Clara's revelation, practicing not just their performance, but integrating the new understanding of what their music meant. Learning that Sarah had been documenting Leo's musical development from early childhood, that she'd had dreams and plans for his future that went far beyond casual strumming in the living room, had added weight to their partnership that was both inspiring and daunting. "Remember," Leo said, standing up and adjusting his guitar strap, "we're not performing for them." He gestured toward the gymnasium where the audience waited. "We're performing for us and for Mom. Everything else is just extra people who get to listen." Edward nodded, struck again by the wisdom that seemed to come naturally to his son when it came to the things that mattered most. They'd had this conversation several times over the past week, working through Edward's performance anxiety and Leo's residual fear of being judged by his classmates. The solution they'd arrived at was elegant in its simplicity. They weren't performing for approval or applause. They were completing something that had been started years ago, honoring a legacy that Sarah had entrusted to them and sharing a piece of their healing with anyone who wanted to witness it. "Fisher family, you're on," Mrs. Patterson announced. And suddenly, there was no more time for nervousness or second-guessing. They walked onto the stage together, Edward carrying 2 folding chairs while Leo managed both guitars. The lights were brighter than Edward had expected, and the audience larger than it had seemed from the hallway. He could see faces he recognized from the school community, other parents he'd met at pickup, teachers who'd worked with Leo over the years, neighbors from their street. In the 3rd row, he spotted Clara Hill, who had driven down from her home 2 hours away to witness what she'd called Sarah's musical legacy coming full circle. Leo positioned his chair and adjusted his microphone with the kind of calm efficiency that suggested he'd been performing on stages his entire life. Edward sat up beside him, checked that his guitar was still in tune, and tried to remember to breathe normally. "Hi, everyone," Leo said into the microphone, his voice carrying clearly through the gymnasium despite its characteristic softness. My name is Leo Fisher, and this is my dad, Edward. We're going to play a song tonight that was written by my mom, Sarah, before she died 3 years ago. Edward felt a ripple of attention move through the audience. The casual chatter and shifting in seats quieted to respectful silence. The song is called Finding Home, Leo continued, and it's about how love is the thing that makes any place feel like where you belong. My mom started writing it when I was little, and she taught me the melody before she died. My dad learned to play guitar so we could finish it together. Edward looked out at the audience and saw faces that had softened with understanding. These weren't judges or critics. They were community members who knew their story, who had watched their small family navigate loss and slowly begin to heal. Some of them had probably wondered if Edward was managing okay as a single father, if Leo was developing normally despite his quiet nature, if they would ever find their way back to something that looked like joy. This song, Leo said, is for anyone who's ever felt lost and had to find their way back home. Leo struck the opening chord, clear and resonant in the suddenly quiet gymnasium. Edward joined in on the second measure, his part simple but solid, providing the foundation that allowed Leo's more complex melody to soar above it. When Leo began to sing, his voice carried Sarah's words with a purity that made several people in the audience reach for tissues. I've been walking down these empty roads, looking for a place to call my own. Every door I try seems locked up tight, but then I hear you calling in the night. Edward found himself settling into the rhythm, his nervousness dissolving as the music took over. This was what they'd been working toward for months. Not perfection, but connection. Not flawless technique, but honest communication. His chord changes were smooth now, his strumming pattern confident, his timing locked in perfect synchronization with his son's voice and guitar. Home isn't in the walls around me. Home isn't in the bed I sleep. Home is in the arms that hold me. Home is in the promises we keep. As they moved into the bridge, Edward added his voice to Leo's, harmonizing on the lines that Sarah had written about love transcending physical space and time. Their two voices blended in a way that surprised Edward with its natural ease. Leo's clear tenor and Edward's rougher baritone creating a sound that was fuller and richer than either could achieve alone. The audience had become completely still, drawn into the intimate story being told through melody and lyrics. Edward could see that people were not just listening to their music, but connecting with their journey. The father and son who had found their way back to each other through the legacy left by the woman they both loved. So I'll keep singing until you find me. I'll keep playing until you're home, 'cause love is the only map we need, and music lights the way back home. As they approached the final chorus, Edward felt something shift in the performance. What had started as a carefully rehearsed presentation had become something more spontaneous and alive. Leo began adding small, improvisational flourishes to his guitar part, and Edward found himself emphasizing certain chord changes in ways they'd never practiced. They were no longer just performing Sarah's song. They were making it their own, completing the creative process that she had started. When the last note faded, the silence that followed was profound. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the applause began, not the polite appreciation that had greeted the previous acts, but something deeper and more sustained. People were standing, some wiping their eyes, others nodding with the kind of recognition that comes when you've witnessed something genuine. Edward and Leo looked at each other across the small space between their chairs, and in that moment, Edward saw everything that had brought them to this point. The lonely years of grief, the tentative first attempts at connection, the patient hours of practice, the revelation of Sarah's hidden legacy, and now this, the completion of something that had taken a family years to build. "We did it," Leo whispered, his eyes bright with tears and triumph. "Yeah," Edward said, his own voice thick with emotion. "We did it." As they stood to acknowledge the continuing applause, Edward realized that this moment wasn't really an ending. It was a beginning. They had proven to themselves and their community that they were more than the sum of their losses, that they could create beauty together, that love could indeed transcend death and find new forms of expression. The shy boy who had been dared to bring a guitar to school had become a confident young musician. The overwhelmed single father had become a partner in his son's artistic development, and somewhere in the space between them, Sarah's dream of a family united by music had finally come true. When they walked off the stage together, guitars in hand, Edward knew that whatever came next, whether Leo pursued music seriously or simply carried it as a source of joy throughout his life, they had given each other something that could never be taken away. They had found their way home. The aftermath of their performance felt like waking up from a vivid dream. Edward and Leo sat in the hallway outside the gymnasium, their guitars propped against the wall, still processing what had just happened. The applause was still ringing in Edward's ears, but more than that, he was trying to absorb the transformation he'd witnessed in his son during those 5 minutes on stage. Leo had been luminous up there, not just musically, but personally. The shy, withdrawn boy who usually spoke in whispers had commanded that room with quiet confidence, had shared the most vulnerable parts of their story without hesitation, had performed Sarah's song like he'd been born to carry her musical legacy. Forward. "Dad," Leo said, leaning against Edward's shoulder. "I think I understand now why Mom loved music so much." Edward wrapped his arm around his son, pulling him closer. "Yeah? What do you understand? It's not really about the notes or the chords or whether you play everything perfectly," Leo said, his voice still soft but filled with new certainty. "It's about the feeling you get when you realize you're not alone. When you sing something true and other people recognize it because they felt it too." Edward nodded, thinking about the faces in the audience during their performance, the way people had leaned forward, the way some had closed their eyes to listen more deeply, the way the entire room had seemed to breathe together during the unquiet moments of the song. "Your mom would be so proud of you," Edward said, "not just for how beautifully you played, but for how brave you were up there. Sharing something that personal with a room full of people takes real courage." Leo was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you think she was watching? Like actually watching?" Edward considered the question seriously. 3 years ago, he would have given Leo a carefully non-committal answer about how people live on in our memories and hearts. But tonight, after experiencing the almost mystical way that Sarah's presence had seemed to fill their music, he found himself believing in possibilities he'd previously dismissed as wishful thinking. "I think," Edward said slowly, "that love doesn't just disappear when someone dies. I think it finds new ways to exist, new ways to connect us. And tonight, when we were playing her song, when we were honoring everything she taught you about music, I think she was there. Maybe not in a way we could see, but in a way we could feel." Clara Hill appeared in the hallway, her eyes still bright with tears from the performance. "That was extraordinary," she said, settling onto the floor beside them. "I've been to a lot of musical performances in my career, but I've never heard anything quite like that. You two didn't just play Sarah's song, you completed it, you made it whole." Edward looked at Clara, this woman who had carried Sarah's secrets for years, waiting for the right moment to share them. "Thank you for coming, and thank you for giving us the missing pieces. I don't think we could have gotten to tonight." Without understanding what Sarah was really planning for Leo, Clara smiled. "That's the thing about Sarah's plan. It was never really about specific lessons or programs or formal training. It was about creating a foundation of love and support that would allow Leo's natural gifts to flourish when he was ready. What you two have built together over the past few months, that's exactly what she was hoping for." Mrs. Patterson appeared with a clipboard and a warm smile. The judges want to announce the winners in a few minutes, but I wanted to tell you both that you've already won something more important than any trophy. You've reminded all of us why we do these shows, not for competition, but for community, for sharing the things that matter most. As other families began gathering in the hallway, Edward noticed something different about how people were interacting with Leo. Classmates who had barely acknowledged his existence before were approaching him with genuine admiration. Dylan Martinez, the boy whose dare had started this entire journey, walked up with an expression that mixed embarrassment with newfound respect. "Leo," Dylan said awkwardly, "that was really cool. I mean really, really cool. I'm sorry about, before, when I said you probably couldn't play." Leo looked at Dylan with the kind of generous spirit that reminded Edward so much of Sarah. "It's okay. Sometimes people say things when they don't know the whole story." Edward watched this exchange with amazement. His son, who had spent years being the target of casual cruelty from kids like Dylan, was offering forgiveness with grace and maturity that many adults never achieved. The confidence Leo had gained through music wasn't just performance confidence, it was life confidence, the kind that comes from knowing you have something valuable to offer the world. Frank Kelly appeared in the hallway, still wearing his work clothes from the construction site he'd left early to attend the show. "Edward, I had to come see what was so important that you've been cutting out early every day." And he paused, looking genuinely moved. "Now I understand. That was something special, man. Really special." Edward felt a flush of gratitude toward his boss, who had grumbled about the schedule changes but had ultimately supported Edward's commitment to his son. "Thanks for being flexible with the work schedule, Frank. I know it wasn't easy." Frank waved off the thanks. "You know what I learned tonight? Sometimes the most important construction project isn't the one you're getting paid for. Sometimes it's the one you're building at home." When the judges announced the winners, Leo and Edward took third place in the family category, an honor that felt both meaningful and irrelevant. The real victory had happened during those 5 minutes on stage when they'd shared Sarah's legacy with their community and proven to themselves that they could create something beautiful together. Driving home through the quiet streets of their neighborhood, Edward glanced in the rearview mirror at Leo, who was holding his third-place ribbon and humming the melody of Finding Home under his breath. "So," Edward said, "what happens now? Do you want to keep playing? Maybe take some real lessons with a professional teacher?" Leo was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "I want to keep playing with you," he said finally. "Maybe we could learn some new songs. Maybe I could write some of my own, and maybe..." He paused, working up courage for something. "Maybe we could play at other places sometimes, like the community center, or maybe even at Mom's grave on her birthday." Edward's throat tightened at the suggestion. They'd never played music at Sarah's grave. Their visits there had always been somber, careful affairs, focused on maintenance and quiet remembrance. But the idea of bringing her songs to her resting place, of filling that space with the music she'd loved and the legacy she'd carefully preserved, felt like exactly the right way to honor her memory. "I think that's a beautiful idea," Edward said. "I think she'd love to hear how the song turned out." When they got home, they sat on their front porch, despite the December cold, tuning their guitars under the glow of the porch light. Leo played Finding Home one more time, softly, like a lullaby for the sleeping neighborhood. Edward provided the gentle accompaniment, his fingers moving across the strings with the confidence that came from months of patient practice. As the last notes faded into the winter air, Edward realized that they had achieved something he'd never thought possible when this journey began. They hadn't just learned to play music together, they'd learned to be a family again, different from what they'd been when Sarah was alive, but complete in its own way. Leo leaned against his father's shoulder, both of them still holding their guitars, both of them finally understanding that home wasn't a place they'd lost when Sarah died. Home was what they'd built together through patience, practice, and the kind of love that refuses to be diminished by loss. In the distance, a neighbor's dog barked once and then fell silent. The street was peaceful, familiar, safe. Their small house glowed warmly behind them, no longer feeling like a museum of memories, but like a place where new stories were being written every day. Edward looked up at the stars, clearly visible in the cold December sky, and whispered a quiet thank you to Sarah for leaving them the tools they'd needed to find their way back to each other. Then he and Leo went inside, put their guitars carefully in their stands, and began planning the next chapter of their musical adventure. Because some stories don't end with the final performance. The best ones just begin there. 6 months later, Edward stood in the soft morning light of Riverside Memorial Gardens, watching Leo carefully arrange the guitar picks around Sarah's headstone. It had become their monthly ritual, visiting on the anniversary of her death with their guitars, playing the songs that connected them to her memory, and adding a small token to the collection of mnemonics that had grown around her grave marker over the years. Today's visit was different, though. Today marked not just the anniversary of Sarah's passing, but the celebration of something new. Leo had been accepted into the Cedar Falls Youth Music Program, a selective summer intensive for musically gifted children. More importantly, Edward had been asked to assist with the program as a volunteer mentor for other parents who wanted to learn alongside their children. "Ready, Dad?" Leo asked, settling cross-legged on the grass with his guitar. At 12, he had grown taller and more confident, but he still possessed the gentle thoughtfulness that had always been his defining characteristic. His musical abilities had blossomed in ways that continued to amaze Edward, not just technically, but emotionally. Leo had written 3 original songs in the past few months, each one reflecting a maturity and depth of feeling that seemed to come from some inexhaustible well of creativity. Edward positioned himself beside Sarah's headstone, running his fingers along the engraved text that read, "Sarah Michelle Fisher, beloved wife, mother, and keeper of songs." Below that, they had added a line that Leo had composed, "Her music lives on." They began with "Finding Home," their voices harmonizing in the way that had become as natural as breathing. Edward's guitar playing had evolved far beyond those first clumsy chord progressions. He would never be a virtuoso, but he had developed a solid, reliable technique that perfectly complemented Leo's more intricate style. More than that, he had discovered his own musical voice, a rhythm-focused approach that created space for Leo's melodies to soar. As they played, Edward thought about all the ways their lives had changed since that November evening when Leo had first shared Sarah's song. The transformation hadn't been dramatic or sudden. It had been built through small, consistent choices to prioritize connection over convenience, vulnerability over safety, hope over fear. Their home had become a place where music lived again. Leo practiced daily, sometimes working on technical exercises, sometimes improvising melodies that seemed to emerge from pure inspiration. Edward had continued his own musical education, not because he harbored any illusions about becoming a serious guitarist, but because learning alongside his son had become one of the most meaningful aspects of their relationship. They had performed together 7 more times since the talent show, at community center events, church gatherings, and a local coffee shop that hosted acoustic nights. Each performance had been different, but all of them had carried the same spirit of authentic connection that had made their debut so memorable. They weren't performing to impress or to advance any particular agenda. They were sharing their story through music, offering their experience of healing to anyone who might find comfort or inspiration in it. The ripple effects had been unexpected and profound. Other families in their community had been inspired to explore music together. Mrs. Chen from next door had started taking piano lessons with her granddaughter. Frank Kelly had bought a bass guitar and convinced two other guys from the construction crew to form a weekend band. Dylan Martinez, the boy whose dare had inadvertently started their musical journey, had asked his parents for drum lessons and was now part of the middle school jazz ensemble. But the most significant change had been in Edward and Leo's relationship itself. They had learned to communicate not just through words, but through the language of shared creativity. When Leo was struggling with anxiety about starting middle school, they wrote a song together about facing new challenges. When Edward was feeling overwhelmed by work stress, Leo would suggest an impromptu practice session that invariably left them both feeling more centered and connected. Clara Hill had become a regular presence in their lives, visiting every few months to check on Leo's progress and to share stories about Sarah that helped fill in the gaps in their understanding of who she had been as a young woman with her own dreams and fears. Through Clara, they had connected with a wider network of families who had experienced loss and found healing through music, a community that reminded them they were not alone in their journey. "You know what I've been thinking about lately?" Leo said as they finished their third song and began packing up their guitars. "What's that?" Edward asked, carefully placing his pick in the small collection around Sarah's headstone. "I've been thinking about how many kids at school don't have anyone to make music with. Like their parents work all the time, or they think music isn't practical, or they just never thought about trying it." Edward looked at his son, recognizing the thoughtful expression that usually preceded one of Leo's more profound observations. "And I was wondering," Leo continued, "if maybe we could do something about that. Like maybe we could teach other kids and their parents how to play together. Not formal lessons or anything, but just showing them that it's possible, that you don't have to be perfect to make something beautiful." Edward felt a familiar surge of pride mixed with amazement at his son's capacity for empathy and vision. Here was a 12-year-old boy who had found his own healing through music and was already thinking about how to share that healing with others. "I think that's an incredible idea," Edward said. "What did you have in mind? Maybe we could start small, like host some sessions at the community center where families could come, and we could teach them basic chords, help them pick songs that mean something to them. Show them that music isn't about being the best, it's about being together." As they walked back to their car, Edward reflected on the conversation and on the broader implications of their journey. What had started as a desperate attempt to connect with his grieving son had evolved into something much larger, a demonstration of how healing could ripple outward from individual families to entire communities. Their story wasn't unique in its elements. Single parents and children dealing with loss were unfortunately common. But their approach to healing, their willingness to be vulnerable in public, their commitment to honoring Sarah's legacy while building something new, had created a template that other families could adapt to their own circumstances. Edward thought about the parents who had approached him after their various performances, sharing their own stories of disconnection and loss, asking for advice about how to reach children who had withdrawn into themselves. He thought about the emails Clara had forwarded from other music therapists who had heard about their story and wanted to incorporate similar family-based approaches into their own practice. Most of all, he thought about the moment during their talent show performance when he had looked out at the audience and seen not judges or critics, but a community of people who were hungry for authentic connection, for stories of resilience, for evidence that love could indeed triumph over loss. "Dad," Leo said as they drove through their familiar neighborhood. "Do you think Mom knew this would happen? Not just that we'd learn to play her songs, but that we'd help other people learn to play together too?" Edward considered the question, thinking about Sarah's original plans for Leo's musical education, her careful documentation of his early abilities, her letters to Clara filled with dreams and hopes for their family's future. "I think your mum understood something about music that took me a long time to learn," Edward said finally. "She knew that it's not really about individual talent or performance. It's about connection. It's about building bridges between people who might otherwise never find a way to understand each other." He paused, glancing at Leo in the passenger seat. "I think she knew that if we could find our way to each other through music, we'd probably want to help other families do the same thing. That's just who she was, someone who believed in sharing joy, not hoarding it." That evening, as they sat on their front porch with their guitars, working out the details of their community music program, Edward marveled at how completely their lives had been transformed by a single moment of crisis that had forced them both to step outside their comfort zones. The shy boy who had been dared to bring a guitar to school had become a confident young musician with a vision for helping others. The overwhelmed single father had become a partner in his son's artistic development and an advocate for family-based healing. Together, they had proven that love could indeed find new forms of expression, that loss could be transformed into purpose, that the most powerful music came not from perfection, but from the courage to be authentically, vulnerably human. As the sun set over their neighborhood, casting long shadows across the street where they had learned to call home again, Edward and Leo began to play, not for an audience this time, not for any particular purpose, beyond the simple joy of making music together. Their voices harmonized in the evening air, carrying Sarah's legacy forward while building something entirely their own. And in houses up and down their street, neighbors paused in their evening routines to listen, to remember their own dreams of connection, to consider the possibility that it might not be too late to pick up an instrument, to reach across the spaces that separated them from the people they loved most, to discover that home was not a place but a feeling, and that feeling could be built one note, one song, one shared moment of courage at a time, because sometimes the most powerful changes begin with the smallest acts of faith, a father willing to learn something new, a son brave enough to share his gifts, a community ready to believe that music, like love, is meant to be shared, to be shared. If this story has touched something in your heart, we invite you to consider the possibilities in your own life. What bridges might you build with the people you love? What fears might you face together? What songs are waiting to be discovered in the spaces between who you are and who you might become? Subscribe for more stories that remind us that healing is possible, that connection is always within reach, and that the most beautiful music is made not by perfect performers, but by imperfect people who choose to show up for each other again and again, until showing up becomes as natural as breathing. Until next time, keep singing, keep reaching, and never stop believing in the power of love to write new endings to old stories. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.